let me start by telling a story, okay? Once there was a blue planet, just like ours, populated by an emerging civilization, and the people of this planet, they spread far and wide all across the planet. And one day they had the privilege, their scientists discovered something that was really unusual. They discovered a new energy source. This energy source was a magnet, it's a giant magnet. And somehow this magnet could convert the stored energy of 100 million years of sunlight into cheap, abundant, and almost unlimited fuel. And at one stroke, this planet's civilization took a huge step up because no longer were they constrained by just the energy of their own bodies or even the energy of animals. But suddenly, they could do so much more. Now, there's only one problem because as they started using this giant magnet, some of their scientists started to tell them that this magnet also attracts iron-rich meteorites. First, you have small meteorites coming to impact the planet, and then slowly you'll get bigger and bigger meteorites, and then they warn that one day there'll be a huge giant meteorite that will come and wipe all life out. Of course, when the people of the planet heard about it, they were skeptical. They said, this is all rubbish. What meteorite are you talking about? And when the first meteor showers first came, they were still in a state of denial because they said that, well, we've had meteor showers forever, right? So what's new about it? And finally, when they realized that, okay, a giant meteorite was really appearing on the horizon, they couldn't bring themselves to do anything about it because their whole civilization and trillions of dollars of infrastructure, their entire way of life, was wrapped around this huge magnet that provided the energy for them to do everything that they could. And unfortunately, they were still arguing the day the giant meteorite hit. We have known for a long time the effects of climate change on Earth. In case you think that climate change was first brought to public attention in 1990 when the first IPCC report is out, it's not true. If you go back in time, you look at articles in the popular press from the 1950s onwards, scientists were already talking about global warming. The science was nascent, you could say, but it was established also because it was just based on simple physics, chemistry, and biology. So what does the IPCC say today? Well, its latest report, which is called AR5 Assessment Report 5, was just released. First report was out in September last year. The next two reports were, I think, released last month. Let's take a look at what it says, okay? This is their summary from September last year. It says, warming of the climate system is unequivocal, and the evidence for human influence has grown since AR4. It is extremely likely that human influence has been the dominant cause of observed warming since the mid-20th century. Okay, this is scientific language, right? Let's see exactly what it means, all right? Unequivocal means it's settled, okay? There's no dispute that the Earth is warming. And extremely likely is a term that the IPCC is very careful to define. It means greater or more than 95% certainty. Compared to AR4, which is at 90% certainty, our understanding of climate science and the effects of humans on global warming is a lot more established now. So we are 95% sure that human beings are responsible for causing the warming that we already can measure. Have we done anything about it? No. Not a surprise. From 1970 to 2000, our rate of greenhouse gas emissions per year was at 1.7%. In the last 10 years, from 2000 to 2010, it has actually increased to 2.2%. So we know more than ever before about the effects of greenhouse gases on the planet, but yet we seem to be blatantly pumping more and more greenhouse gases into the atmosphere every year. Let's take a look at another chart from the March report of AR5. Okay, there are two lines as you can see there. RCP stands for Representative Concentration Pathway. Okay, this is one thing that I personally always felt was a problem in science communication. When you see a figure like RCP 8.5, most people have no clue what it means, and it means totally nothing, and eyes start to glaze over. 8.5 actually refers to the watts per square meter, or what they call radiative forcing. In other words, the net warming effect caused by greenhouse gases. Now, a lot of people say 8.5 watts per square meter is not a lot. Why? Because solar radiation that hits the atmosphere is at 1,366 watts per square meter. So yes, compared to incoming solar radiation, 8.5 watts actually is very little. But because the Earth, before humanity, had an impact on it, was really quite balanced in its energy balance, this 8.5 watts is actually causing all the problems that we are seeing already in weather systems. So there are two possible scenarios here. You have a RCP 8.5, which is a high emission scenario, and RCP 2.6, which is a low emission scenario. I prefer to call RCP 8.5 business as usual, or the road to hell, because if you look at the median or the mean increase, you're talking a 4.5 degree rise in global temperatures. Okay, this is the average. Some parts will warm more than 4.5, some parts will warm less than 4.5. But keep this figure in mind, right? 4.5, because we're going to come back to it later. And if we get our act together, if we finally realize the scale of the problem, if we can mount a World War II scale mobilization, maybe we can keep warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. Okay, so this is the problem that scientists are telling us. Now, you probably will have heard from a few months ago that there was a lot of controversy about the accuracy of the climate models because there is this thing called a false pause. Or rather, in the last 10 years, people have said that, well, actually, surface temperatures have not increased as much as predicted. Therefore, there must be something wrong with the climate models. Actually, that's not true at all. Global warming is still taking effect. The difference you see today is that, yes, in surface temperatures, the increase has not been as much as expected. That's because 90% of the warming of the Earth actually goes into the oceans, and that's where a lot of the extra warming has gone to. But you know, everything moves in cycles. In the last 1 week, I'm sure you have read that scientists are predicting a very strong El Nino this year, and El Nino is actually the way that heat from the oceans goes back into the atmosphere. So there's no way that you can actually escape the warming, okay, one way or the other. It's going to the oceans, ultimately it's going to cycle and then it will affect the atmosphere. But what Michael Mann, who is a very well-known American climate scientist, did in this Scientific American article was he went to track what would really be the effect if what he called the climate sensitivity, okay, that means the rate at which the Earth warms in response to CO2, what if actually it wasn't as much as we thought it would be? And what he did was he ran his climate model along 5 different scenarios as set out in the IPCC, and he found 2 trend lines that most closely match the observed instrument record, okay, which is the bottom, okay, those are actual readings, okay. Beyond the false pause, that circle is actually, these are all just projections. Okay, what does this mean? ECS, okay, another scientific term here. ECS stands for equilibrium climate sensitivity. What it measures is the final equilibrium state, the final increase in temperature arising from a doubling of CO2 in the atmosphere. And the 3.0 and the 2.5 measure the amount of warming, so it's referring to 3 degrees or 2.5 degrees Celsius. So these 2 lines actually show different states of climate sensitivity. Now, bear with me, okay? Let me explain what these lines mean. So you have ECS 3.0. You double CO2, the Earth will warm up to 3 degrees Celsius. Obviously, we have set our threshold for catastrophic climate change, that limit that we shouldn't breach, to be 2 degrees Celsius. So you run the models backwards. When will you reach 2 degrees Celsius? 2036, just 22 years from now, okay, assuming ECS is 3.0. Then you have also heard that we need to keep CO2 emissions or atmospheric concentrations below 450 parts per million. Now, 450 parts per million under ECS 3.0 scenario actually causes the temperature to breach 2 degrees. So by itself, it's not safe. But the problem is it gets worse because a lot of our CO2 emissions come from coal-fired plants. Now, coal-fired plants also put out aerosols and particulate matter into the air. And those have a cooling effect. So if you were to cut CO2 by closing down coal-fired plants, you'll clean the air, but actually you'll warm the atmosphere even more. So we'll go way in excess of 2 degrees Celsius under ECS 3.0 scenario. Okay, and 2036 is the deadline. Now, supposing the Earth wasn't as sensitive to CO2 as we think it is. Let's say it goes down to ECS 2.5. How much more time will it get? Not a lot. So there's the false or the allegedly false pause in global warming, even if it were to be true, will only buy us 10 more years, 2036 to 2046. Again, look at the trend lines. If you keep atmospheric concentrations at 450 parts per million of CO2, yes, you'll be below the 2-degree threshold, but take away the effects of cold aerosols, and you will still exceed 2-degree limit. So in fact, the only safe limit, assuming a ECS 3.0 scenario, is if you keep CO2 levels at 405 parts per million. This is the analysis done by Michael Mann, okay, in this article. What's the problem here? Last month, for the first time in human history, our average CO2 concentrations in the atmosphere already reached 400 parts per million. So if you are talking of 405 parts per million as the safe limit, effectively we have to stop burning all fossil fuels immediately. And if we still want to go on the 450 parts per million, we have to stop burning it very quickly. If you carry on the way it is, the scale off subsequently will be greater and greater. And even if you assume that the climate is not as sensitive to CO2 as thought, it only buys us 10 more years. So false pause or not false pause is not going to buy us a lot of time. Another chart from the IPCC report. Okay, if you look under RCP 8.5, the scenario, that line, which is business as usual, shows us what we plan to actually burn in carbon. If you want to do 2.6, which I call the carbon budget, you can see for yourself the space between the two lines is how much we have to decarbonize. Now I look at these charts, and instead of feeling depressed, actually I feel inspired because, you know, it's a grand challenge. I like the idea that humanity, Singapore, our young people, can rise up to this challenge and say, wow, you know, maybe we have to decarbonize 90%. It's something that I want to strive towards because it's a humanity level problem that I want to solve. Let's take a look at some other facts, okay? This is an illustration that if you see Jeffrey Rush from Santa Fe Institute, he always uses this illustration, so I copied this from him. He asks, what is the basal metabolic rate of a human being? In other words, when you are at rest, okay, just sit still, lie down, how much energy do you actually burn? Well, it turns out that our basal metabolic rate is only 70 to 100 watts, which is the power needed to power one incandescent light bulb. So really, to keep a human being alive actually needs very little power. The average American's power consumption is 11,000 watts, okay? It's the metabolic rate of a blue whale. Now, this gives rise to a problem, okay? Because I don't think the Earth can support 7,000 blue whales, or 7 billion, okay? 7 billion blue whales. Now, lest you think that I'm just taking 2 points and making, you know, a trend line, I'm not, okay? There is this thing called a mouse to elephant curve. You can go and search it out. And you find that there's an amazing symmetry between body mass and metabolic rate from animals or mammals. So the blue whale is at one end and humanity is at the other end, and something clearly is wrong when humanity, which is lower down on the curve, is burning energy like a blue whale, which is at the upper end of the curve. We are defying the limits set by biology and our ecosystem. Again, the US is not unique in this. Yes, at 11,000 watts, it's very high, but look at the rest of the world. 2,000, 4,000, 6,000. You know, Singapore is not very far from the US either. This is done by, I believe, WWF. They call it Global Footprint Network. They calculated that in 2010, we are already consuming 1.5 Earth's worth of resources. We carry on the way we are doing, we're going to consume 3 by 2050. Is there a way that we can go back to sustainability and consume 1 Earth's worth of resources? That is the challenge that's facing us. This is another scientific article. Now, a bit more scientific, a bit more theory behind it. They call it a safe operating space for humanity. 7 planetary boundaries, 3 of which we have already exceeded. The remaining 6, we are close to exceeding it. And all the arrowed planetary boundaries are those with implications of food production. Okay, and I highlighted those because this talk is about food security. Our entire agricultural system is based on a stable climate. That assumption is no longer true. Let me show you what I mean, okay? Human civilization and agriculture developed during an extraordinarily stable climate in the last 10,000 years, which scientists call the Holocene. Okay, you can see that bar there, or that horizontal bar. That is the global range of temperature in the last 10,000 years. Our whole way of life evolved based on these climatic conditions. Now all that is changing. Remember that 4.5 degrees Celsius under RCP 8.5 scenario, that's 4.5 degrees Celsius, how it looks like, but going up. Now, lest you think that 4.5 degrees is not a lot. Okay, think again, all right? Climate is something that is very hard to intuitively understand. Why? Because in the course of a day, the temperature from maximum to minimum easily can exceed 4.5 degrees Celsius. In many parts of the world, it might even exceed 15, 20 degrees Celsius. So many people think 4.5 degrees Celsius is just like the difference between daytime and nighttime, or maybe between spring and early summer. It's not, all right? The last time temperatures were 4.5 degrees Celsius, different from now, was during the Ice Age. Think about it, okay? 20,000 years ago, when 2-mile deep ice sheets covered New York City, that is 4.5 degrees Celsius. Global difference between today and now we're headed the other way, 4.5 degrees Celsius up. How does that look like? Well, 55 million years ago, there was an event called the Paleo-Eocene thermal maximum, where temperatures rose in a relatively short time, geologically speaking, by 6 degrees Celsius. And parts of Greenland appeared like parts of southern Florida. This is what 6 degrees Celsius is looking like. And under RCP 8.5 scenario, the upper end of that scenario is 6 degrees Celsius warming. Okay, so we're talking about large-scale changes to the Earth that we have never seen before. People say humanity will survive. Why? Because you have technology. I'm not so sure about that. Because where would the people go? This is not like the old days whereby people are nomadic and you can migrate northwards or southwards in response to changing temperatures. There's nowhere to go. This is a crowded planet that is getting increasingly warmer. At no point in modern human history has temperatures ever reached what we are experiencing and will continue to experience for the next 50, 100, 200 years, or whenever, depending on what we actually do about it. Some people say, crops grow better in a higher CO2 world, so it's not a bad problem. Is that true? If you look at the basic photosynthetic equation, what are the input factors? It's carbon dioxide and water. So yes, CO2 goes up, theoretically, you'll produce more carbohydrates, right, which is more food. But the limiting factor, of course, is water. Okay, and I'll talk about later, large parts of the Earth are under water stress. Then, of course, there are nutrients. You need nutrients in soil. You need nitrogen, you need phosphorus, and you need potassium. All that is being depleted as our soils also get less and less. They get depleted of these essential nutrients because of over-farming and overuse of chemical fertilizers. Plant water loss increases in a warmer world. Evapotranspiration increases. Which is why, if you look at the International Rice Research Institute, they have already said, and I think this was from several years ago, for rice, wheat, and maize, the rule of thumb among agricultural scientists is that grain yields will decline by 1% for every 1 degree Celsius rise in global temperature. Recent studies have also shown your crop yields may increase, the quality of the food that you produce goes down. The left side is a study that came out from UC Davis in April, and the right side was actually a study that came out in news outlets, which I picked up one day ago. CO2 significantly reduces the nutrient contents in major food crops. So back to the IPCC. They have done their modeling for food security too, all the way until the end of the century. And as you can see, the number of studies that predict that crop yields will suffer proportionately increase more and more as the century goes on, as temperatures increase. So at the start, which is around now, 2010 to 2029, you could say, well, it's about half-half. Some parts gain, some parts lose out. Extrapolated to the end of the century, most parts lose out significantly, only some parts gain. The IPCC actually talks about food security, but in very typically dry scientific language. Negative impacts of climate change have been more common than positive impacts, bracket high confidence. I mean, strip it of its scientific, balance of language. It's a stark warning that we are facing a food crisis. And if you look at the last sentence, it says that since AR4, which is 2007, there there have already been several periods of rapid food increases following climate extremes that indicate a sensitivity of current markets to climate extremes. So climate change, as far as food production is concerned, is already happening. It's not something for the future, it's something that's already happening now. Now, if the problem were just a global rise in temperature, and if that linear, or if that rise was linear, maybe we could do something about it. The problem is that climate change is leading to extreme weather events. Let me just show you two. Okay, and these may not be so well known because I purposely picked those that people may not have heard before. The first one concerns drought. Again, a study, and it shows that by the end of the century, more and more parts of the world are going to be in severe drought conditions. Okay, this is a model study. But we already see it happening. In 2003, you can see the regions of increased productivity versus decreased productivity, and tracking productivity between 2000 and 2009. Researchers have already found a global net decrease due to regional drought. So drought as an effect of climate change is already happening. Its effect on plant productivity is already happening. This is not a modeled scenario. This is actual measured events that have happened. This is, to me, even more worrying. Okay, it's a NOAA study. And it says that actually, even if we were to stop CO2 emissions completely today, the climate conditions that we have actually started are going to be there for the next 1,000 years. So how do you read this chart? Now, supposing we come to our senses and when it reaches 750 parts per million, we stop all CO2 emissions. How long will it take for the Earth system to basically sequester all the CO2 so that we go back to normal? Well, 1,000 years later, if you look at the upper horizontal bar, you'll still be at 460 parts per million. So at 750 parts per million, you can see large regions of the Earth are already in the region or the observed range of major drought. 1,000 years later, large parts of the Earth are still in the observed range of major drought. Which is why many effects of climate change are, as scientists say, they are irreversible. They are there for the next 40 generations. The things that we are doing or not doing now don't just affect your children, they affect your next 40 generations of people. Okay, it's something that we have to keep in mind. Colombia. You know, in 2010 to 2011, it rained for 11 months in Colombia. I couldn't believe it, okay? But this is from Time magazine. And the Colombian scientist or the head of this ministry, he said that climate change is not a future threat because it is taking place right now. Look at extreme rainfall events in the UK. November 2009, biblical flooding. You keep seeing these terms over and over again. Once in 500 years, once in 1,000 year event. November 2009. February 2012, British super drought. So 2.5 years, record rainfall, biblical flooding. After a super drought, 2 years later. And then last winter, record winter rain, wettest since 1910. And I mean, it's not just rain. The Atlantic storms were incredibly powerful. This is actually a wave that hit the shore, okay, in February 2012. It actually, you know, the wash of the wave actually covers a hill. That's how strong the Atlantic storms were in the UK. What did the UK Met Office say? Well, quite rightly, they said that you can't attribute climate change as the cause for any one extreme weather event, but they also said that there is no evidence to counter the basic premise that a warmer world will lead to more intense daily and hourly heavy rain events. And the reason is very simple. For every 1 degree warming in the atmosphere can hold 7% more water vapor. So more water vapor means that when it rains, you're going to have more rain. So it's going to likely lead to floods. Then because it's warmer, it dries faster, and that's why it leads to droughts. And the water vapor has huge latent energy in the atmosphere, which leads to more powerful storms. So these are all basic physics. You will see more powerful storms, you'll see more extreme rainfall events, and in between the rainfall events, the soil is going to dry up faster, and that's what's going to lead to drought. Some people say, well, we'll adapt because we had a green revolution, and you know, People used to warn that the world will run out of food, people will starve. It never happened. Yes, grain yields increased tremendously, and that really was instrumental to stave off starvation. But look, world average grain yield, while tripling since 1950, the pace is slowing. It's slowing more and more because we're reaching a limit to how much more productive our conventional farming systems are. And the problem is not just on land, it's happening in the oceans too. So everything to do with marine aquaculture, your wild fish catch are all affected too, because global warming reduces ocean productivity. It starts off at the phytoplankton level, which is the lowest of the food chain. And then CO2, as it dissolves into the ocean, makes the oceans more acidic. And this is the evil twin of global warming, because scientists have measured that a tipping point will be reached at pH 7.8, when some of your calcifying organisms will no longer be able to form shells and they will start to die. So your phytoplanktons are the lowest, the most bottom form. Your zooplankton, which is your calcifying organisms, are the next one. If these two goes, every level above it is going to be affected at all. We are going to reach from surplus to scarcity. Food stocks globally have dropped from 108 days in 1997, and I went to take a look at the USDA site. In 2014, it's 73 days. Okay? We are getting less, we're having less and less buffer. So back to the IPCC report, risk of food security, breakdown of food systems. Very dry language written in a very unemotional way in a very thick report. But if you take a look at it, it's scary. Breakdown of food systems. You're talking of food crisis, you're talking of food riots and things like that. So let's take a look, all right? I've talked about all these are projected events. Let's take a look at what exactly has happened in 3 countries, okay? 3 major food-producing countries. Let's start at Russia. In Russia, they had a very severe heat wave in 2010. Now, some of you may remember the European heat wave in 2003. It killed 35,000 people. The 2010 heat wave in Russia was worse in terms of the temperature impact. It also killed, I think, slightly more than the 35,000 in Europe. But what's more scary is that Russia lost 40% of its grain harvest, 40 million tons. There's no reason why this heat wave only hits Russia and it doesn't hit, say, the American Midwest. If it had been centered in Chicago instead of Moscow, do you know what's the equivalent loss in grain harvest? It would be 160 million tons. 10% of the global grain supply would have been lost in an extreme heat event if it had happened in the American Midwest. The Russian president said, what is happening now is evidence of global climate change because we have never in our history faced such weather conditions in the past. It wasn't just heat waves, it was wildfires that raged out of control. And this is quite significant because the past and the current president of Russia actually said, well, we're actually a northern country. If we warm up 2 or 3 degrees, it's not terrible. He had to eat his words, all right? What caused the Russian heat wave? We'll come back to this in an instant, but I just want to show you this. It all arises because of jet stream fluctuations. Jet stream peaks up northwards, brings very hot weather further north. When it goes down to the south, the trough, it brings cold weather all the way to the south. In this case, it was at Pakistan. Cold air reached the warm tropical air. It caused record flooding in Pakistan. Again, another extreme weather event. And take a look at the part that I highlighted. Russia produced a soft type of wheat that is suitable to making bread that is exported to the Middle East. You know what happened in 2010? Arab Spring. Arab Spring is not just a political event. One of its triggers, okay, not the only trigger, one of its triggers was rising food prices. In many of these Arab countries, in Egypt, for example, 40% of disposable income goes to buying food. If food prices spike 20%, people eat 20% less. Really, it is that serious. And people riot because they go hungry. Let's take a look at what's happening in Siberia now. We talk about heat waves. Every year since then, they've been having heat waves and wildfires. August 2012, 48,000 square kilometers of forest were burned. 200,000 firemen were deployed. That's an army, 200,000. We don't hear about it because it's Siberia. But it's not a small thing, okay? 2013, Great Siberia burning, okay? That area that I highlighted is called Yakutia. It's one of their provinces. Massive fires, August. But take a look at this now. 4th August, fires in Yakutia on the left, a storm coming in from the Pacific. 11th August, the storm and its rain had wiped out the fires. But in its place, it left flooding in the Amur region, largest flood in Russian history. Flooded area extended from Lake Baikal to the Pacific Ocean. You take a look at your map, right? Lake Baikal to the Pacific Ocean is a very, very extensive distance, okay? Again, we don't hear very much of it because not that many people live there. What about 2014, April? Siberia experiencing midsummer temperatures. This is just the beginning of spring. Take a look, April 28. These are all satellite photos that are available online. The fires that you see here are incredibly large. The burn area is 270 square miles, 460 square miles. If you thought that the fires in Riyadh that we experienced in February and March were big, these are bigger. Again, you don't hear very much about it because it's in the middle of nowhere, but it's there. And it's causing problems for Russia because, firstly, it's symptomatic that their weather is reaching extremes. They are having temperature extremes that will affect their grain production. And in areas that they thought that climate change would be a benefit of them, Siberia, get warmer so you can have more cropland to plant, it's not happening because every time it gets warmer, that land which is full of carbon-rich material is going up in flames. Russian grain production from 2007 to 2007 to 2013, the peak was in 2008. 108 million tons of grain was produced. Last year, 91 million tons. Look at 2010. That was the year. Heat wave, I said 40% drop. Yeah, it dropped. 60 million tons. Russia stopped all grain exports because it wasn't even enough to feed their own people. This is what's happening in Russia today. One of my theories why Russia is so interested in Ukraine, Ukraine is the breadbasket of Europe. It always has been. In World War II, why was Germany interested in Ukraine? Why did it fight a war with Russia over Ukraine? This is what Hitler said. I need Ukraine so no one can starve us out again, as they did in the last war. Ukrainian soil is very, very fertile. The Germans wanted the grain and, of course, other raw materials in the Eastern Europe for themselves, and they wanted to settle German colonies in Ukraine. Of course, along the way, they had this mass genocide extermination program to make it happen. Even today, even without the most advanced agricultural technology, Ukraine is still number 5 in the world in terms of grain exports. 20.7 million tons of grain was exported in 2012. I believe this is one reason, okay, not the only reason. This is one of the reasons why Russia is in Ukraine. It needs it for its grain for future food security, because its own food production is precarious. Now let's look at the US, okay? What happened in the US? 2012, heat wave 2, you know. Heat wave, American Midwest, but yet cold California and Rocky Mountains, west of the Rocky Mountains. Keep that in mind because this year, the situation totally reversed itself, okay? The cause, jet stream again. See the fluctuation of jet stream? Extremes, peaks, extreme troughs. Decimated US corn, 2012, because of the drought. Agricultural prices started to rise. This year, we have a reversal. Again, it's back down to the jet stream, but now, instead of Midwest being warm, it's Midwest becoming very cold. Instead of California becoming very cold, California is now in the midst of a drought. What's causing it? Well, if you go and look at the internet, they'll say it's because of the collapse of the polar vortex. Actually, this is just a fancy name for saying that the jet stream pattern collapsed. What happens is this. The jet stream, the speed of the jet stream is caused by temperature differentials between the tropics and the poles. Okay, that's what drives global weather systems. The polar regions are warming much faster than other parts of the world. So the temperature differential is getting less. The speed of the jet stream is getting less. And just like a stream, as it flows slower, it starts to meander, right? Because every time it reaches obstacles, it starts to deviate and here and there. So you start seeing all these peaks that you have never seen before. Peaks that go up, very high north, valleys that go south, very far south. The worst thing is that these troughs and peaks stay in place. They don't move. Normally a jet stream, if you take a look, it moves. The pattern of the troughs move. These don't. California has been in this situation for months. They don't move as much as it does before. This is another study that linked the California drought and the collapse of the polar vortex to global warming. If you go to a US drought monitor website, you'll find some interesting animations. Okay, we don't have time to let it run, but let me just show you briefly what it says. 2011 is upper left. Not many places were in drought. You can let the animation run the whole year. You'll see a lot of the places in drought were more on the eastern side in Florida. 2012, okay, it starts to happen in Texas. It then goes up to the Midwest, because we talked about it just now, extreme heat. 2013 continues in the Midwest, still very strong in Texas. By 2014, it has spread westwards to California. A few weeks ago, the whole of California was officially in drought conditions. It's never happened before. And then once again, you see scientists warning, worst drought in 500 years. You see all these things start to come again. Worst ever, once in 500 years, once in 1,000 years. All these extreme weather events are becoming more and more common. Let's go at China. China is very interesting. It believes in a policy of self-sufficiency. So while it is one of the biggest producers, in fact, in many areas, it's the biggest producers of grain in the world, they actually don't go out into the world to buy because they have made it a policy to be self-sufficient. But if anything happens to China grain production and they have to go out into the world to buy, because of their scale of purchase, it will bring chaos to the world's grain markets. You can see, for rice, for wheat, China is number 1 in the world. Corn, they're number 2 in the world. Imagine a day whereby because of wheat failure, rice crop failure, corn crop failure, they start buying on world markets. Prices of these commodities will skyrocket. China has its own problems relating to climate too. Climate change is causing a weakening in the East Asian monsoon, which is critical for its agriculture. It's been identified as one of the countries that have water shortages. And in this presentation by Lester Brown, he highlighted a case of Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia, it's mostly desert, but they actually tried to farm wheat for a long time. They totally depleted the aquifer, and of course now the aquifer is empty. So the wheat production, they have actually projected that it will go down to 0. This is what happens when you overpump an aquifer and you just run out. There's just no way you can refill it, okay? It's just not going to happen, and you're just going to have food production just drop off the cliff. Can that happen to China? The Chinese realize that they have a very interesting situation. 80% of their water resources are in southern China, but most of industry and agriculture is in the north. So since Mao Zedong's time, he's been having this grand plan to build what you call a north-south water diversion project. Basically, they have built 4 incredibly long canals to connect the Yangtze River with the Yellow River, to divert water from the Yangtze, which is of course the biggest river by far northwards. Now, they have completed parts of it now, but there's a problem. Both rivers start off in the Tibetan Plateau, where the Himalayas are. Himalayan glaciers are melting too. 3 billion people depend on rivers that are born in the Himalaya and the Tibetan Plateau. You can see all these old photos taken by mountaineers, okay, from close to 100 years ago. See how much the glaciers have receded. In the short term, you will have more water flow as the glaciers melt, but the glaciers act as a store of water during dry season. Once they melt, China is going to run out of water in summer. And there's no water that you're going to be able to divert from the south to the north because both rivers are going to start running dry. They are going to be in serious problems for agriculture, which is why China is actually buying water from the rest of the world. Not many people know this. Do you know China is actually buying water in Japan? Japan is very rich in water. And as a country with a stable and even declining population. They actually don't need so much. Hokkaido is very rich in water. Chinese are there buying, quietly, shipping the water back to China. China's soil is also terrible, okay? Their air is terrible. Their soil pollution is probably even worse. It used to be a state secret when they first held their soil survey. But in a stunning display of transparency, they have actually come out publicly to say that 20% of their arable land is contaminated by heavy metals, okay, which is why I frankly wouldn't eat anything that comes from China. But right now, their total amount of arable land is below their self-defined red line of self-sufficiency. They are going to have to go out and buy grain soon. They're having dust storms. This is a picture of a dust storm on 23rd April. Just look at the scale. I mean, you think air pollution is bad here. Just look at the kind of things that happen in China when the desert blows the sand in. And their consumption is skyrocketing because, like developed countries, they are also starting to eat more meat. And if they start eating more beef, we're in serious trouble. As it is, they feed their animals not with residues and grass and things like that. They feed a lot of their animals with soybeans, which is why they are the world's largest purchaser of soybeans. And who's the largest producer of soybeans? Is Brazil. Brazil is also in the drought. So we have bad news from all over the world. In fact, the worst drought in decades is now occurring in Brazil, and because Brazil is so dependent on hydroelectricity, even their power supply is affected because their dams are running so low. So Brazil is also having problems. So imagine if Brazil can't produce enough soybeans and China continues to want to produce or consume more soybeans, and China itself has drought problems. There's only one conclusion. Prices of food will skyrocket. This is the chart, 2010, 2011. This is the Arab Spring. You can see the current levels are not very far from the peak in 2010. And this is for all food, for all parts of the world. It's by the Food and Agriculture Organization. I took this chart from today because I'm always interested to look at agri prices. This is the agriculture fund. Okay, it's traded in the US. It looks at corn, wheat, sugar, pork, beef, and so forth. Look at the trend. 2008, global food crisis. Look at the price that spiked up. Then after Arab Spring, 2011, US heat wave, 2012, you can see the spikes for itself. And look at the extreme right, starting to rise up again. Why do I think that actually it's likely to go up? Look at the trading volume, okay? More than the price, look at the trading volume. Trading volume indicates how many people are trying to trade this commodity. Food prices are no longer just determined by just physical demand and supply, but also speculation. Look at the trading volume whenever there's a food crisis. It is a lot of speculative pressure that causes food prices to go up. And that's why I say that we are not immune. Just because we think that we can buy food from anywhere in the world doesn't make us immune from it. The prices, the spikes and the drops will get wider and greater in effect because of all these factors, okay? So it's a shock. It's just like there's extreme weather, there's also extremities in food prices. I believe that this is the way that it's going. I found this in a Straits Times article from last week. I didn't know this, but I'll share it with you. Apparently, we had a food crisis, or rather a Thai rice crisis in the 1970s. Almost overnight, Thai rice prices shot up 4 times. So we are not immune, right? Now, of course, in Singapore, we are fortunate. If price of rice goes up 4 times, yes, it will affect many households. People will be affected. I don't really think people will start starving. Some people will eat less, of course. But it's unlikely that, people will really starve. But in many parts of the world, if a price of a commodity goes up 4 times, people really will start starving. So why did I call this heading for apocalypse? Well, if you believe biblical prophecy, in Revelation, the 3rd horseman of the apocalypse has a very cryptic saying that I never quite understood. It says a quart of wheat for a day's wages and 3 quarts of barley for a day's wage. So during the first crisis in 2008, I went to go and calculate how much does actually a quart of wheat cost. About $1, okay, for both wheat and for barley. If it really costs a day's wage, you're talking of many times skyrocketing kind of prices. But even at these prices, okay, there are many people in the world who earn less than $1 a day. It is already starting to cost almost a day's wage for them. Societies have collapsed because of environmental degradation. Read this book, Jared Diamond, okay, he has many, many examples. Historically, Angkor collapsed because of drought, because of climate change. Darfur in Sudan, we always think of it as an ethnic conflict. It's not. It's an environmental collapse that precipitated an ethnic conflict. The stresses were there. The environmental collapse pushed it over. Why? In this case, because of declining rainfall, because of the advancement of the desert, so that previously arable land just become desert. Syria, ethnic conflict. It's a revolution of hungry people. 4 years before the conflict started, Syria experienced its worst ever drought in modern history. That drought continues. The society is not going to be able to get back in time for Syria, unfortunately. So what can we do about it, okay? After all the bad news, some ideas. If you look at this chart, natural systems are the best way to pull CO2 from the atmosphere. Remember we talked about 405 parts per million. I'll say this, it's impossible to change our fossil fuel system overnight, or even in the next 50 years, to really hit 405, or to stay within 405 parts per million. We have to think how to pull it out of the atmosphere. There are many expensive ways to pull it out of the atmosphere. The simplest way is actually plant crops, plant trees, plant things that can sequester carbon. Because if you look at the anthropogenic, okay, the human flows of CO2 versus the natural flows, the human flows are actually just a tiny fraction of it. If you can just increase the natural sequestration flow, we can actually solve a lot of the climate change problem. Agricultural, forestry, and other land use accounts for 25% of global greenhouse gas emissions. It's not something that we can ignore if we want to address GHG problem at a global level. I'm convinced the solution is in front of our eyes. We need to rely on natural systems, self-sustaining, single expenditure, easily understood and maintained even by poor communities, and global scale can be rolled out with immediate impact. No new technology needed, just change farming and agricultural practices. Look at this map. Where are the carbon stocks? They are all in the tropics. The parts that are, of course, carbon rich are, of course, in the far north, like in the tundra, but those are quite inaccessible. The parts that are accessible are actually Southeast Asia, Africa, Amazon. But Southeast Asia in particular is very accessible because we're near the coast. Okay? It's not like Congo, which is kind of like war zone, right? And Amazon is really in the middle of nowhere. Actually, most of Southeast Asia is very accessible. What can we do? We can sequestrate carbon in stable forms that last hundreds of thousands of years, like biochar or terra preta. Increasing soil carbon increases fertility of the soil. We can close the nutrient loop. We can produce biofertilizers, and in our climate, it is the best climate to produce biofertilizers, and we can roll it out at the next growing season. Farmers understand this. It doesn't need any fancy new technology. Organic farming can drastically reduce the impact of agriculture on climate change. Increasing the amount of fungi in the soil can actually increase soil carbon significantly. You should read this book, it's fascinating, by Paul Stamets. What you don't see could be the most important thing. Why? Up to a third of the world's stored soil carbon, which is far in excess of what's in the atmosphere, actually is in this chemical called glomalin. And what's glomalin? It's actually secreted by mycorrhizal fungi in symbiotic relationship with plant roots. So if you increase the growth and the volume of this fungi in the soil, they will produce glomalin, which is a sticky sort of material. You know, when you pick up good soil, it's not just the color. So good soil has this texture, what you call tilt. No, it just holds water, it holds nutrients well. What is it about it? It's actually glomalin. It's that sort of glue thing that's in there. It's produced by the fungi, and up to a third of the soil carbon is actually in the form of glomalin. Let's look at basic agriculture R&D. I've always said that one of the shortcomings that we have in Singapore is that we have concentrated too much on biomedical sciences. We have omitted ecology, we have omitted soil chemistry, we have omitted agriculture, because we said that we don't grow any of these things, so why do we care? But as you will see, These are the things that may save us at the end. Okay, not that medicine is not important, not that biomedical is not important. But what if we had a technology that can enable crop to take nitrogen straight from the air, as some crops already do? Then you don't need to actually put in chemical fertilizer, which leads to greenhouse gas emissions in both its production and its use. We have done molecular approaches to plant sciences. Let's pair it with classical approaches, whereby, it's about hybrids and breeding and so forth. Not everything needs to be genetic, even though we have approaches in that we have to continue to encourage. New farming systems. This is vertical farming. This is the AVA project, Sky Greens. If you go to Lim Chu Kang, I think lane 2, you'll see it there. Very simple invention, but potentially game-changing. Just a A-frame kind of rotating trays, and you can drastically improve the productivity of vegetable production, okay, with this. And if you were to climate control it, you could, of course, eliminate a lot of the weather extremes, the pests, and so forth. You can even use LED light to improve plant yields. Stevia, okay, is a corporation that makes stevia. I don't know where they heard of it. Stevia is a kind of sweetener. It's a natural sweetener. Okay, for many years, it was banned in the US. I think it was also banned in Singapore, but now the US FDA has relaxed it, so it's going to be appearing in more and more food products. It's good because, firstly, I think it's 0 calorie, so it's suitable for diabetics, and it's natural. It's a leaf. If you have a chance, go to a stevia plant and pluck a leaf and chew it. It really tastes like sugar. I tried it before, okay? So anyway, stevia is now using agricultural drones to shine LED lights, because they believed in the lab, their experiments have confirmed that with just intermittent shining of red light, it actually can trigger the plant to actually produce a lot more. What about aquaculture? Vertical recirculating aquaculture systems, something that you can do. These are all local companies that we have come across. Lim Shrimp Organization. I'm sure most of you have never heard of them. They used to run the world's largest integrated shrimp farm in Lampung in South Sumatra. You know how big it was? 100 kilometers by 30 kilometers. It was 2 times the size of Singapore. That's the scale that they're doing, and actually they're here in Singapore. They no longer run there, but they run other projects around the world. Multi-Tropic aquaculture systems. I know Shannon Lim, entrepreneur, trying to do this. He has a setup now at Neo Tiew. He tried it out in his home. He did it in his own swimming pool, apparently. Okay, and I hope he's successful, because he could be onto something. He's basically reproducing the natural ecosystem in aquaculture. What about using offshore oil rigs, okay, so that you can farm in deeper water? Yeah, maybe things to consider, considering that we are quite a lot of expertise in building oil and gas rigs. What about new sources of food? This company called Essentian, they wanted to farm the world without farmland because they believe that they can create microorganisms that can produce proteins, drop-in proteins. So with just CO2, seawater, and sunlight, the microorganisms can produce protein, okay, which is equivalent to producing meat, right? Because, our main reason why we eat meat is because of protein. And they can produce it, they claim, 1,000 to 10,000 times more land productivity than if you were to rear a cow, for example. Inedible agricultural residues can be turned into food. Okay, this is a popular science article, turning tree cellulose into starchy snacks. Why not? We need to eat less meat. We need to eat less beef in particular. Beef is extremely climate unfriendly. This is a FAO article. They advocate eat insects. Now that's not, actually many people in the world eat insects already. Okay, if you just get over the fear factor, there's actually nothing wrong in eating insects per se. Of course, we prefer not to eat insects in the insect form, right? So why not eat it in grind form? This is an American product, chapu. You can buy it. They call it a cricket energy bar. It's an energy bar. It's made out of what they call cricket flour, okay, which they then make into a bar. You can't taste that there's anything funny in it because they flavor it with chocolate or peanut butter and everything. I'm convinced we need to soon substitute animal protein with insect and plant protein. And of course, you have all this kind of fake meat from plant protein that's So in the US, in Singapore, you know, you go to a Chinese vegetarian store, already you have mock meat, right? That's basically from plant protein. So, lucky or not, I think we have to eat more of this stuff. Huh? We need to recover more agricultural resources from waste. Wastewater today contains phosphorus and nitrogen that are depleting supply. We need to recover it. The problem today with our modern agricultural system is that we take phosphorus, nitrogen from the soil, from one part of the world, it becomes food, it goes to cities in another part of the world, human beings eat it, they pass it out, and then it just gets dumped in a landfill or just gets burned in an incinerator. We are basically transferring nutrients from one part of the world to another part of the world, and to restore the fertility in the first part of the world, we dig up more fossil fuels to produce chemical fertilizers. I mean, it really doesn't make sense at all. We can't close the loop. There are plenty of nutrients in human waste. Seriously, 70% of recoverable nutrients in human waste are from urine. And urine is actually largely sterile. It's not difficult to precipitate out nutrients from urine. You can produce struvite. It's already being done. This company actually, Ostara Nutrient, they actually precipitate struvite from municipal wastewater. Like I said, we should go beyond producing compost to biofertilizers. What are biofertilizers? They are basically fertilizers that are inoculated with beneficial microorganisms, all with chemicals, all with plant hormones like cytokinins that will make plants grow better. Remember what I talked about biochar, I think? It's sort of like this idea, except they put in a lot of other ingredients. It's not that we don't know how to do it. Green Agritech is actually run by Singaporeans. It's just that they are based in China. Look at the market in Asia for fertilizers. We are talking about millions of tons. This is a huge market that is currently not being met. We can do food zones. Pulau Bulan is where we get all our fresh pork supply. It's just next to Batam. 100 square kilometers in size, fully owned by Salim Group, Indonesian Salim Group. Only 15 square kilometers used for pig farming. The rest of the island is vacant. Can we use it as a test site for new agriculture and aquaculture concepts? Something worth thinking. A couple of years ago, Rabobank approached us. They said, look, to address haze, we need to change the way people farm. So why don't we try to do an agri-business development and change the way people farm, so that instead of burning the land and burning the trees, everything, they farm in a sustainable way. And then we produce products, okay, under contract farming for Singapore. I don't know whether these are all feasible, but definitely I think it's something that's worth trying. Let me end. In 1722, Europeans first discovered Easter Island. And when they went there, they discovered two things that mystified them. The first was, of course, the statues, the great stone statues of Easter Island. The second thing was they discovered Easter Island had no trees at all. The island used to be heavily forested. Sometime in the preceding centuries, Easter Islanders had completely cut down every single tree. And I've always wondered what went through their mind when they cut the last tree down. Because the moment they cut the last large tree down, they were marooned on Easter Island. They could no longer build canoes that could get them off Easter Island. And you know, Easter Island is really in the middle of nowhere. What was going through their mind? Now, I don't think that they cut it down overnight. I'm sure they cut it a little bit, and then someone said, maybe you shouldn't cut so much. Then they'll say, yeah, but what's the problem? We still have young trees. Don't you see that lots of young saplings are growing? But eventually, they cut everything down. This is the problem with changing baselines. This is the problem when it comes to climate change. I'm afraid that we won't know how bad things are because we will have forgotten how good things were. All these extreme weather events, soon we're just going to accept it as a norm. We have forgotten how good the climate was in the past. And we just accept that, well, this is just the new normal and that you have to live with it. There was a recent NASA study that said industrial civilization is headed for irreversible collapse. Okay, another very depressing headline. Why? Overexploitation of planetary resources. And the second thing, unequal wealth distribution. So I've done a lot of thinking. Why don't people do something about climate change when there is so much scientific proof and warning of it? My theory is this. We don't do anything about it because at the end of the day, we don't really believe it's our problem. Just like for a long time, we never believed that income inequality was our problem. We kind of thought that if people are poor, it's because we are cleverer. We thought that if people are worse off and they can't get ourselves out of a bad situation, it's because, well, they're just not talented. Too bad, that's their lot in life. Whereas the truth is that most of our outcomes in life are actually because of where we were born, frankly. So when it comes to climate change, do I think that we have a global responsibility? Yes, because where we are seated now in a position of comfort, it's not because we are cleverer in using our energy or anything. It's simply because we're luckier, that's all. And somebody in Bangladesh and someone in Africa is going to suffer, is going to die simply by accident of birth. And therefore, I believe that there's a moral responsibility to deal with it. If you look at this study on income inequality, the interesting thing is that when we address income inequality, all the other problems that we're trying to solve, health outcomes, environmental outcomes, actually they get better just because there is less unequalness. Last slide, all right? This is a picture that Voyager 1 took in 1990 when it was 6 billion kilometers from Earth. NASA asked it, turn around and take a photo of the entire solar system. And it so happened that Earth, that pale blue dot, was captured in one of the reflected light rays, okay, that came across the camera. It's perfectly captured in it. This is a very famous photograph. Okay, you can find it on the NASA website. It's called pale blue dot. President Jimmy Carter, at the time that Voyager 1 was launched, he had a statement in a plug that Voyager carries with it, so that if ever we encounter alien civilizations, there's a message, okay, that these civilizations can decipher. What do you say? This is a present from a small distant world, a token of our sounds, our thoughts and our feelings. We are attempting to survive our time so that we may live into yours. We hope someday, having solved the problems we face, to join a community of galactic civilization. This record represents our hope and our determination and our goodwill in a vast and awesome universe. We have a choice when it comes to climate change. Are we going to do what is needed so that humans' civilization can continue to flourish and we can move beyond the Earth into the stars, like what Voyager aspires to? Or are we going to be a declining civilization where the only thoughts and history of humanity rests on an Earth that is getting more and more uninhabitable? I'm not sure how to solve the problem. I see it all the time. I feel personally a sense of challenge. I feel excited that I'm living in a time that potentially we can do something about it. But the scale of the problem is also so great, I don't really know whether it can be solved. All I know is that if we all don't try, we're at this fork road. The road to prosperity is clear. The road to decline is equally clear. It's time for us to make that difference and to make a choice. And I hope in your own ways that you will make that choice and you would be that sphere of influence to your friends and whoever else you can influence to do something, okay? Not just for the sake of humanity, not even just for the sake of your children, but for our own sake. Because as you have seen from this presentation, the effects of climate change are real. It's already happening today. Thank you very much.